Good afternoon, or good morning as the case may be, and welcome to today's webinar on the New York State Department Cybersecurity Regulation. I'm Alan Calder, and I'm going to be your host for today, also your guest speaker. My background is in information security and IT governance. I and we as an organization have been involved in helping our clients comply with a wide range of cybersecurity regulation across the US, in Europe, in Britain, and elsewhere in the world for about the last 12 years. And at the heart of what we do is a book I wrote originally in the late 1990s, now in its 6th edition. It's called IT Governance. It's a guide to information security and data protection used in a number of universities. And in a sense, that book has enabled us and the thought leadership we've built out of that to become a leading global provider of services for cybersecurity and IT legal compliance around the world. We focus very much on governance of IT, risk management, compliance, and all of the components that go with helping organizations to ensure that their IT is helping them achieve business objectives and, frankly, to keep out of jail. We've got a particular specialism in the International Information Security Standard ISO 27001, 27001. We've helped probably now 450 plus organizations prepare themselves for successful external audit and certification to the standard. Our books, documentation, toolkits, and training courses have helped thousands of other organizations and individuals around the world on their journey towards demonstrating effective information security. And really, we work with board members, senior executives, C-suite executives, senior managers to help them tackle the compliance, risk management, and governance issues in ways that make practical business sense to the organization rather than would simply drive up costs. And as I said, our consultancy and training businesses are pretty well symbiotic. Our trainers are all practicing consultants, so when you join one of our training courses, which we deliver live either in the classroom or online, and I believe we have a series of training courses, particularly around ISO 27001 and the financial sector regulation coming up at the end of this month. You're talking with people who have practical experience in implementation, and usually a practical experience that draws across all of the areas that we work: data protection, incident response management, penetration and security testing, PCI. They're all different facets of an effective cybersecurity program. So our agenda today is to talk about the effect on the New York financial sector, on, if that's your business and the transition timelines, to talk about how ISO 27001, the internationally recognized standard, can help you achieve certification, and how certification can help demonstrate that you have applied due process to comply with the regulation, to look briefly at how a gap analysis can help you identify the steps that you need to take to deploy ISO 27001 effectively, the policies and procedures that enable you to demonstrate compliance with the NYDFS regulations, and then the specific issues that you need to add into your cybersecurity program, particularly to meet the 180-day deadline, bearing in mind that we're now nearly 90 days into that first 180-day period for the initial set of compliance achievements for the regulation. You may already be aware that the requirement in principle is that any financial institution operating in the state of New York has to put in place security measures that will ensure that it protects itself against cyber attacks. And the driver for this is obviously the massive increase over the course of the last 12 to 24 months, the spike up in cyber attacks focused on the financial sector. The Identity Theft Resource Center, for instance, said that in 2016, financial organizations alone suffered 52 breaches. That's breaches which were admitted, and 72,000 records were compromised. The Bangladesh Central Bank's SWIFT payment system was attacked in late 2016. It had a set of identifiable vulnerabilities that the SWIFT system could have closed down, but hadn't. The Bangladeshi bank hadn't closed down. Attackers were able to get away with $81 million worth of fraudulent transfers via the Federal Reserve in New York. And that's a pretty significant amount of money for attackers to be able to get away with, simply because the organization has inadequate cyber defenses. The financial service sector is one of the highest ranked industries for breaches. As you have a look in the period June 2015 to April 2016, Security Scorecard looked at some 361 organizations around the world to identify where breaches took place. Financial services organizations accounted for some 10% of those breaches, as you can see there, fifth from the top in the range of institutions. Healthcare, the major standout area for breaches. So under the financial services law, the key issues and its clauses 102, 201, 202, 301, 302 and 408. The NYDFS superintendent has the authority to carry out, to impose civil penalties on organizations that are found to be non-compliant and to impose fines for non-compliance in relation to specific regulations and to false reporting. And the determination, the preparedness of the NYDFS superintendent is pretty evident. Deutsche Bank got fined $425 million just earlier this year for violating anti-money laundering laws because there were inadequate precautions to identify what the compliance issues were, and that included inadequate documentation. Documentation is a key part of the new requirements, weak risk assessment and under-resourced staff, all of them fairly typical issues of organizations that suffer breaches, and all of them issues that the regulation requires to be dealt with. The reason why regulation has become inevitable is that the attack surface for organizations now includes not just technology weaknesses, but weaknesses in process and in people. And attackers, there is a huge range of attackers, starting with the non-target specific malware, worms and automated attacks, which are loose on the internet, which simply seek out vulnerabilities and exploit them. So at one end there are non-target specific, non-targeted but very effective internet-borne threats, and at the other end are nation states and competitors for whom attacking a weak organization is a pretty normal and straightforward thing to do. Serious organized crime has very substantial investment in online fraud capability. There are significant capabilities with fraud as a service, with fraud as a platform. You can download and operate fraud software very inexpensively, as in for tens and twenties of dollars. You can deploy denial of service attacks at between $10 and $30 an hour. So it's very easy now for people to mount attacks, and with a very broad attack surface, a very broad range of threat types, malware, web attacks, exploit kits, ransomware, it's really easy for attackers. And attackers typically are not looking when they're mounting an attack for a specific result. They're just looking for vulnerabilities. Of course, if you're a central bank, then they're looking for specific amounts of money, specific benefits, but for most organizations they're looking to break in, find what they can, and that's typically going to be card data, personally identifiable information, it's going to be money, and the results of that kind of a breach is going to be damage to reputation, it's going to be potentially fines, it's going to be potentially class action suits, all of them areas that organizations, financial organizations, particularly those which are tight in terms of resources, simply don't need to have. And what the regulation in effect is saying is, rather than waiting to be breached, because you will be breached, rather than waiting to experience the range of costs that dealing with a breach will certainly cause, it makes sense to get on with putting in place the necessary defenses early on before you breached, while it's affordable. The requirements became effective on March 1. So the reporting requirements kicks in February the 15th, 2018, the very substantial date that one has to focus on. There's a 180-day target which comes in to effect at the end of August, so we're halfway through that 180-day period, and by the end of that period organizations have to have got in place a cybersecurity program driven by an overarching cybersecurity policy, have to have tackled access privileges and made sure that they are structured on a business need to know basis, have started dealing with the requirements around having proper cybersecurity personnel, proper intelligence and threat intelligence in place, and to have an incident response plan. All of the critical initial components of an intelligent cybersecurity program you need to have in place, and if you haven't started, you need to get going pretty quickly. If you started, then that's good. Then there's a set of targets which come after a year, after 18 months, and then after 2 years. So and folks, there's an opportunity. You will have noticed that you're muted. That's to deal with background noise. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions toward the end of this webinar. We're going to go for a total of about 45 minutes, and with a bit of luck there'll be somewhere around about 5 to 10 minutes available at the end for you to ask questions. Do please use the Q&A function. You can type questions into the GoToWebinar panel. It'll collect the questions, and when we come to the end of the webinar, then I'll read the questions out and then I'll answer them all, so everybody knows what the answer is. So that's the program for the webinar as well as the program for the next 2 years. Who must comply? Well, the regulation applies to all financial services organizations based in the state of New York. That's banking institutions, savings and loans, private bankers, trust companies, insurance agencies, health insurers, and check cashers. Any institution that falls under NYDFS supervision has to comply. There are some exemptions for companies that have fewer than 10 employees, less than $5 million in revenues over the last 3 years, and less than $10 million in total assets. There are some additional more detailed exemptions that are set out in the clauses which are listed at the bottom of the slide, and those really apply to entities that do not handle, access, possess, or own non-public information. So if you do handle, access, possess, or own non-public information, you're almost certainly caught by the regulation unless you can demonstrate that you're a very small business that meets the exemption criteria. So how do you go about complying with the requirement to have a cybersecurity program? What does a cybersecurity program look like in any case? And the answer is all set out in an international standard. ISO 27001 is an international standard that has been developed over the last 15 to 20 years. It first appeared in the late 1990s, and I know this because the company that I was leading then was the first company certified to the very first version of what's now ISO 27001, and it's become the recognized, accepted, go-to best practice standard for a cybersecurity program. It's now got a very substantial ecosystem of implementers and auditors, of people who understand how it works, who can help organizations implement it, who can provide support services, who can audit it. It's got a very substantial internationally recognized set of certification processes that enable an organization certified in one jurisdiction to be recognized for that cert in another. And many leading companies have already achieved ISO 27001. Microsoft, the New York Fed, IBM, Citibank, Amazon Web Services, to name but a few. And you can usually see that simply by visiting their websites. And if you look carefully, you should find an ISO 27001 certificate showing on the website. And of course, having an ISO 27001 certificate doesn't just mean that you've found a useful tool for coordinating your multiple legal, regulatory and contractual compliance requirements, but you've also found a tool which once you achieve certification enables you to demonstrate to customers that you have a leading approach to cybersecurity, that you provide in relation to customer and personal information a level of security that competitors don't. ISO 27001 is built on two important concepts. The first is that there needs to be a proper balance between confidentiality, integrity and availability of information, and the second is that organizations should make the decision about balance in a way that's appropriate to the organization. In other words, a business-oriented, risk-based decision. ISO 27001 is a standard, so it's a document with a set of clauses in it. The important clauses are clauses 4 through 10, and clauses 4 through 10 set out what a cybersecurity program has to be, how to create one. So it covers areas like top management support, it deals with roles and responsibilities, communication programs, what your risk assessment has to look like and so on. And it's got a working relationship with another standard in the family, that's ISO 27002, and ISO 27002 is a set of controls. So there are about 114 cybersecurity controls identified in it with guidance on how to implement them. Very similar to one of the NIST special publication series that deals with controls, and frankly with ISO 27001 you can use the NIST controls, you can use ISO 27001 controls as appropriate. But the key thing is that ISO 27001 at clauses 4 through 10, that's the middle of the block on the left, sets out the cybersecurity program. Annex A lists a set of controls, the description of which is contained in ISO 27002. So there are two standards which are designed to work together. The 114 controls in listed in Annex A and described in some practical system, software, technology, sector agnostic way in ISO 27002 cover all of the key areas for cybersecurity, from policy and organization through cryptography, access control, comm security and so on, and they take in those key areas such as physical and environmental security and HR security, all of which are part of building a rounded and comprehensive cybersecurity program. So you know that there's a bunch of things you've got to do. You know that there is a standard that you can deploy. How do you go about doing it? And the answer is to start with a gap analysis, because of course you almost certainly will already have a number of cybersecurity controls in place. You already have a number of practices around cybersecurity in place that you don't need to replace. You're already doing them. And so a gap analysis is a logical starting point. You take ISO 27001, you compare what you're doing to the requirements set out in the standard, and that gives you an action plan for how you can bring yourself up to put in place the necessary technical and organizational measures to demonstrate compliance with the standard and thereby and therethrough with the regulation itself. Remember that the regulation says that your cybersecurity program has to be informed by the results of a risk assessment, because that's how you determine the specific risks facing your own entity and to the information you're processing and to your information systems. And you can only really focus your cybersecurity risk controls when you've identified the risks that you have. And ISO 27001 is built on exactly that concept, which is what makes it such a great standard for developing a cybersecurity program. Carrying out a risk assessment can be time-consuming. It covers a lot of assets. It covers all of the information assets you've got inside the organization. So it's dealing with data, personal data, card data, financial data, as well as the organization's own confidential information, financial plans, trading results, reporting results, client information, and managing a risk assessment just on a spreadsheet is kind of difficult. It's very easy to get things in the wrong place, to carry out the exercise wrong. And so using a risk assessment tool, and as resellers of the VS Risk, a tool from Vigilant. It's the tool that we tend to recommend. It's a tool which is designed to hold an organization's hands while they do an ISO 27001 risk assessment. And it's a risk assessment which enables you, having identified the risk, to deploy controls which come from both the ISO family of standards, but also from PCI, necessary if you're processing payment card data or you're a payment gateway, and also from the NIST Special Publication Series. So it's an effective tool, and your cybersecurity program, if it's built around ISO 27001 and a tool like VS Risk, has got itself into a very good place to kick off in terms of meeting the requirements of the regulation. What do you have to do in the way of policies? We've looked at, you have to have a program, you have to have a risk assessment. The requirements in section 500.3 are for a cybersecurity policy, and the cybersecurity policy needs to cover off quite a lot of areas, either in the policy itself or in the more detailed documents which will support the policy and turn the policy into a working program. So if you start with a cybersecurity or information security policy, you'll then need to follow through and deal with issues like data governance, classification of information. How do you classify non-public information between highly sensitive and less sensitive? How do you determine, therefore, what information can be made available to whom, how long it has to be protected for? Your asset inventory and device management, dealing with mobile devices, laptops, workstations, servers. All of them are devices which, because they process and store data, need to be appropriately protected. One of the key controls that organizations can deploy is to allow only authorized devices onto the internet, and you can achieve that quite effectively if you carry out an asset inventory. You know what should be there, and then you simply put in place a processor, a technology solution which allows only identified assets onto the network. Access controls, really fundamental to effective cybersecurity. You have data breaches because people can access data they shouldn't see, and so building access controls from the network level in and working down towards software and applications is a key step. Business continuity and disaster recovery planning, because you have to be able to meet business requirements on a regular basis. You can't do that if a denial of service attack or some other natural disaster takes your systems offline. So business continuity is part of the overall effective cybersecurity. How you deal with system operations, system uptime and availability, network level system security, the physical security for buildings, for data centers, physical security for key members of staff. If a key member of staff has a stolen iPhone or BlackBerry or some other mobile device, that can give an attacker an easy way of getting into the network. Privacy of customer data, protecting customers from violations of privacy, managing third-party services, remembering that some major data breaches, Target is an example, occurred through inadequate management of vendor security. All of that driven out of a business-focused risk assessment process supported by a well-tested incident response mechanism. You also, as we saw, have to have an appropriately trained bunch of folk in the organization, so appropriately qualified cybersecurity personnel. That means you need to decide what qualifications you're going to put in place, what the appropriate mix of skills, experience and qualifications will be. You need to identify that, ensure that you're maintaining that. You need to have an awareness of cybersecurity issues in your core security staff and across the organization, which is going to be sufficient for the growing, changing and increasingly life-threatening cybersecurity challenges. And there are certifications like the Certified Information Security Lead Implementer qualification. You can read more about that on our website. You can do that course live in next week. I believe there is a foundation and a lead implementer course running Tuesday through Friday next week. There's the Certified Cyber Risk Management Practitioner course, again focused on how to tackle cybersecurity risk. And so there are qualifications available. They don't tend to be many because the recognition of the need for appropriate qualifications is relatively recent, but these are qualifications which we know will meet the requirements. So you need to have in place the correct mix of skills, make sure they're properly maintained inside the organization. I've talked several times about incident response, and the starting point for thinking about this requirement is the reality that every organization is going to be breached. Every organization sooner or later is going to suffer an attack because is going to suffer a breach, because if you think about it, however successful your defenses are, you have to be successful against multiple attacks every day, every hour of every day. The attacker only has to succeed once, and attackers will succeed once. They'll plant a piece of malware today which they might not action for several weeks or months. By the time they action it, it could be embedded in your backups. They can then simply switch it on, and then it will start doing whatever they wanted to do, talking to a command and control server outside, and it'll take you some time to find it. On average, these kinds of breaches are found somewhere around about 180 days after the first incursion. So the regulation requires a written incident response plan. It requires that you've thought through the various ways in which, as an organization, you might be breached. You've thought through, you've role-played, you've gamed, you've tested all of the different ways in which you can respond, so that when it does actually happen for real, you can start dealing very effectively with isolating the incident, isolating the equipment, making sure that it doesn't spread, and then responding as quickly as possible, making sure that data is protected, dealing then with stakeholders, dealing with regulatory reporting requirements. All of that should be pre-planned, tested, and you should know how it works. Many of you will have read about the ransomware attacks mounted a couple of weeks ago. Those all reflected a series of vulnerabilities that shouldn't have been there. Those organizations which had patched, who'd upgraded their operating systems, mostly survived. Those that didn't lost access to systems for between a few hours and many days. And the hackers who mounted the ransomware attack were able to get away with substantial sums of money. Organizations that had weak systems but good incident response plans were able to contain and deal with the breach. So it's a regulatory requirement, section 500.16. There's a bunch of resources you can turn to on our website. The two green papers for free. One is talking about the regulation and how it how compliance with it can be demonstrated by implementing ISO 27001 and seeking accredited certification. And then part 2 maps the specific requirements of the regulation to the clauses of ISO 27001. And there's some other free data on our website, free information about the standard, about risk assessments. All of that you can access through these links. And I believe the slides will be made available after the webinar, so those of you who signed up for it, the slides will be sent out, or a link to the slides will be sent out tomorrow. I've touched briefly on the live online training courses. So there's a foundation course which kicks off, it's a one-day course, kicks off at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard on Tuesday. It's a single qualification, Certified Information Security Foundation qualification. It's a live online course, and then that's followed by the lead implementer course, which kicks off at 9 a.m. again Eastern Standard on Wednesday next week. It runs through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then those courses repeat in August, November, and February for the foundation, and then the same months for the lead implementers. So there is ongoing online live training with a specific flavor around the regulation and meeting the regulatory requirements. There's a bunch of other tools that you can access through our commercial website. The Cybersecurity Documentation Toolkit is a particularly useful item if you are booking on any one of our online training courses. and then there might be a time-limited offer. You can get 20% off the toolkit if you've got a booking that you can point at. There's our risk assessment software, and of course there's the ISO IEC standards themselves. All of that is available through our IT Governance USA website. And that brings me, folks, to the end of the prepared slides. So we've got a little bit of time to be able to deal with any questions that you've got. Please, if you've got questions, could you post them into the Q&A section, and I'll pick up the questions and answer them. So let me just take the first question here. Get it out. So the first question don't we have to assign the CISO within 180 days? Slide only shows the CISO under 1 year requirement. The appointment of the CISO must be accomplished within the 180 days. It's absolutely required, absolutely correct. It's 500.04 that says the CISO's report on cybersecurity is due within the year. So yes, you should have appointed the CISO within the first 180 days. If you haven't done it already, you want to get focused on that. The CISO needs to be somebody who's got the right mix of technical and business security competences that can ensure that you're delivering against the requirements of the regulation. For the companies that don't have enough budget and employees, what options are there to have the CISO? Our understanding of the regulation is that you can have a CISO on a part-time basis. You can hire somebody who's able to do the role. The key thing you have to be able to demonstrate is that the CISO is able to, in what you're paying them for, to be able to carry out the role adequately and properly. They have to have enough time and resource to be able to ensure that the cybersecurity program is complete. And frankly, in a small organization, the time required for CISO with a properly put together cybersecurity program shouldn't require full-time effort from a CISO. A properly put together cybersecurity program should be something which the CISO can monitor the effectiveness on an ongoing part-time basis. The effectiveness of an incident response plan, proper data gathering, and all of those are key parts of enabling that to happen. But frankly, the core issue is that unless you can find an exemption, you've got to comply with the regulation, and the fact that you don't have enough resource means that you've got to make commercial decisions about how you can deal with that specific challenge. How much do you have to do to be compliant? It seems that the requirement states, as per the risk assessment, that you have to make the decisions about the controls that you put in place. And yes, of course, the risk assessment could be different from vendor to vendor, but the key issue in carrying out a risk assessment is that you have to do it with due diligence, taking account of the obligations placed on you to protect data. And that means that you can't simply carry out a risk assessment and decide that you're going to accept all of the identified risks, because that will be a negligent approach to risk. The whole purpose of the cybersecurity program is to enhance security and improve the protections for clients and financial sector information. And so while there may be no approved vendors, there might be no approved minimum requirements in terms of risk assessment, the brutal reality is that if you make some risk assessment decisions which are so inadequate that you still get breached, you're still going to have to report the breach, you're still going to be pursued by the superintendent, by the New York superintendent, as well as potentially by district attorneys and by those who stakeholders and those who have class action grounds. They're all going to pursue you. They're going to pursue you for damages. They're going to pursue you also for breach of your obligations under the cybersecurity program. So frankly, I wouldn't look to the fact that there is no minimum defined requirements for risk assessment and assume that that gives you a let-off. I would say exactly the opposite. I'd say that it probably means you need to take a particularly cautious approach to how you assess and determine risk in relation to the regulation. The next question is around how does ISO 27001 help demonstrate compliance with the regulation? Well, because ISO 27001 is supported by an accredited certification scheme, an independent certification organization that's accredited by a national accreditation body. The US has a national accreditation body, the North American Accreditation Board. It accredits certification bodies, companies like Perry Johnson Registrars, BSI, DNV, LRQA, and there are many others, and they are accredited to carry out audits of companies who claim to be in compliance with ISO 27001. Registrars, also called certification bodies, are not allowed under the accreditation scheme to provide consultancy, so they're independent of consultancy advice. They'll carry out an audit of your compliance with ISO 27001. One of the specific requirements of ISO 27001, clause 4.1, is that organizations have to identify the legal context within which they are operating a cybersecurity program and ensure that their cybersecurity program is mapped to the requirements of the relevant local regulations. And so an external auditor will be looking at your ISO 27001 management system, will look to see that it's mapped to the requirements of NYDFS, and will then carry out an audit which says yes it is, or no it isn't meeting the requirements of the standard. And the fact that it's an independent audit that indicates that you're in compliance with the standard means that if at some later point you're breached or you're accused of not having been in compliance with the standard, you can turn very easily to the independent audit and say, not only did we pass this audit a year or 18 months ago, but we've been continuously audited against it, against the standard, so we've been able to demonstrate that we continue to maintain compliance. And that means that you've got a very powerful defense in any court action against any accusations of negligence, because you can demonstrate that you've applied internationally recognized best practice, that you've had a internationally recognized certification body carry out an audit. And folks, it's important to know that for a small and medium organization, the cost of a certification audit is not that expensive. You know, for a SOC statement on controls audit, you might be looking at $25,000 to $50,000. An ISO 27001 compliance audit is nothing like that. You're typically, for a small to medium business, looking at an audit that might cost somewhere in the order of maybe $4,000 to $8,000, depending on the size of the organization and the number of days necessary to carry out the audit. Because the auditors know what they're doing, they're auditing you against an international standard. They don't need to come and spend days or weeks trying to understand how you do cybersecurity. They already know how to do that, because they've got an international standard to work with. So it's an incredibly cost-effective way of getting an independent audit to demonstrate compliance with the regulation. And not only, of course, as I said earlier, does that mean that you can demonstrate compliance in law courts to regulators, it also means that you can show customers and other stakeholders that you take cybersecurity seriously. I have to say that it's not just NYDFS. Everything that we see talking to investors, talking to venture capitalists, talking to financial institutions, is that cybersecurity has gone right up their agenda. It's gone from being something which they worry about when they get a bit of spare time on the golf course on a Friday afternoon, to something which is right center of the board agenda on Monday morning and Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning, and worrying in investee companies, in target M&A companies, in companies managing their funds. Worrying about cybersecurity has now become a mainstream habit. And so one of the ways in which, as an institution, you can boost your competitive edge is ISO 27001, and that gives you the satisfaction not just of demonstrating compliance with the regulation, but actually really genuinely getting ahead of competition, genuinely getting into a place where you're able to demonstrate that you're on top of what we undoubtedly see as the biggest risk issue for organizations in the next 5 years. Cyber criminals become more and more effective. The sophistication of crimeware becomes greater and greater. The ease with which it can be deployed becomes greater and greater. And so less and less competent criminals can deploy more and more competent, more and more effective crime software more and more often, more and more frequently, more and more effectively. We already have a global shortage of cybersecurity professionals running into the hundreds of thousands, and one simple way organizations can avoid getting caught by the I don't know what to do, we haven't got an effective professional, is to turn to a standard like ISO 27001, implement it, do it, it's not difficult. You're in a position to demonstrate that you've done a good job on compliance. And folks, I think that looks as though we come to the end of questions. We also come to the end of the time allotted for the webinar, so that just remains for me to say thank you all for joining us on this webinar. It's just 90 days to go to meet that first set of deadlines. You need to get a CISO appointed, a policy in place, an incident program in place. We can, of course, help with all of those. Do give us a shout, do go on our website. You'll find that we've got all of the resources there that that you might want to be able to access. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for being with us, and I wish you a good day.